China, Russia seek to subvert the U.S.-led Middle East order, expert. China sentences two famous human rights activists to long prison terms. China's No.1 Funeral Village, one-third of shops closed, almost 10,000 people lose their jobs. Taiwan warns China's mistake that could lead to the outbreak of World War. India ramps up funding in disputed region with China. China and Russia continue moving closer to the Middle East, while diplomatic relations with the United States remain cool. Russia, a country at war for more than a year, held negotiations for peace in the Middle East. In early March of this year, news agencies reported that officials from Saudi Arabia and Syria would respond to Russia's peace deal calls. China was in a similar position before these possible Russian agreements. On March 10th, Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to restore diplomatic relations. In addition, last March 15th, the armies of China, Russia, and Iran announced joint military exercises in the Gulf of Oman. Recently, in an interview published by the news media NTD with analyst and author Brandon Whiteshirt, the role of the alliance between China and Russia against U.S. hegemony is highlighted. Whiteshirt believes the U.S.-led Middle East order is gone, or at least collapsing. In this respect, the Biden administration would fail to maintain power in the Middle East. Whiteshirt points out that the Biden administration did not firmly sustain its presence in the region and that China is moving full speed ahead using Iran as its proxy. The Russians are also moving along with the Chinese by partnering with them. He added that this is more or less the result of America's failures of diplomacy. For 20 years and with several trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives, they tried to maintain control and influence over the region. For only a fraction of the cost and in half the time, China moved at breakneck speed and is completely reordering the map. According to Whiteshirt, China's advance took the United States by surprise. He commented that China is exerting its presence on the world stage in ways previously unknown to the U.S. It has always been a power in Asia, and before it was primarily a geoeconomic force. But now they have become so wealthy and integrated with the rest of the world that China is turning that geoeconomic power into diplomatic and military power. It is interesting to note that for Whiteshirt, China does not want to increase peace in the region. But what do we see? The ink hasn't even dried on this Chinese-backed deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Iranian-backed Hezbollah and Lebanon are firing rockets at Israel, Whiteshirt said. He added that this is not bringing peace or love or happiness, and this is creating disorder. China is managing this disorder to stir up the hornet's nest and drive the Americans out of the region. The author pointed out that the Chinese Communist Party's ultimate goal is to have greater control and access to the most important energy sources in the Middle East, such as natural gas and oil, while isolating Israel's progressive democracy to gain access to high-tech countries. China on Monday sentenced two prominent human rights activists to more than 10 years in prison each. The legal scholar Xu Zhiyong received a 14-year sentence, and human rights lawyer Ding Jiaxi got 12 years. It is the latest in the Chinese Communist Party CCP's years-long crackdown on dissent. According to Axios, on April 10th, Xu, 50, and Ding, 55, were charged with promoting the New Citizens Movement. It is a civil rights movement that encourages Chinese citizens to exercise their fundamental rights enshrined in the country's constitution. They were detained after participating in an informal gathering in the coastal city of Xiamen in 2019. This gathering features more than 20 lawyers and activists to discuss governance and human rights. According to the newspaper, Xu had previously written an open letter from his hiding place to President Xi. In the letter, he called on President Xi to step down. After that, Xu and Ding served 4 and 3.5 years in prison for crimes related to their activities. The verdict was not publicly announced, but Ding's wife, Liu Shangchun, tweeted about the ruling, expressing sentences like oblivious to facts and arbitrary. She did not address their beliefs in Chinese state media. The Congressional Executive Committee on China, CECC, said the chairs condemned the sentencing of Xu Zhiyong and Ding Jiaxi, whose arbitrary detention and torture highlights the CCP's systematic abuse of human rights and violation of international law. A group of U.S. lawmakers and government officials who monitor human rights in China disagree with the above judgment. At the same time, the CECC has called on Secretary of State Antony Blinken to lead a global effort to gain their immediate release. Wang Yaqiu is a senior China researcher at Human Rights Watch. Wang Yaqiu said Beijing's treatment of the country's best-known human rights defenders should be a reality check for foreign leaders rushing to return to business as usual with Beijing. In 2015, more than 300 legal activists were detained, and many received lengthy sentences. As for the CCP, it denies allegations of human rights violations and says other countries are politicizing the issue.
Traditional Chinese funeral activities greatly interested the people during China's Qingming Festival. As Chinese media reported, the Jinlong Mountain Cultural Tourism Scenic Area in Xiaoyi Town, Shanxi Province, did not allow villagers to go up the mountain to worship their ancestors. A funeral shop in Huzhou City, Zhejiang Province, was also administratively fined for selling funeral items and accused of superstitious behavior. The incident has caused controversy, making people wonder why worshipping, which has always been a Chinese tradition, has suddenly become a feudal superstition. According to China's Law and Regulations database, in recent years, many places have introduced customs-changing policies to promote civilized worship, prohibiting the production and sale of feudal superstitions funeral items and banning votive paper burning at funerals. 1/3 of shops closed, and nearly 10,000 people lost their jobs. No.1 Village in Mijiawu Town, Hebei Province, is known as China's #1 funeral village. According to Jiupai News, in 2021, there were more than 500 funeral shops in the village. But on the eve of this year's Qingming Festival, funeral items were still sold in the village market, but interest was well down on previous years. Compared to previous years, almost 1/3 of the shops are closed. A villager explained that some large shops have changed to online operations and small ones will naturally be phased out as their profits drop. According to Titanium Media, by 2022, Mi-Bei-Zhuang Village had 20,000 to 30,000 people involved in the funeral industry and had up to 500 funeral shops on a 1-kilometer street, monopolizing 90% of China's funeral supplies. The village has an annual output value of nearly $160 million, or 1.1 billion yuan. According to data from the National Bureau of Statistics of China, the number of deaths in China maintains a steady growth trend. Estimates are that this number in 2020 was about 10 million. As a result, the China Funeral Association estimated the revenue of China's funeral industry would reach over $145 billion by 2023. However, Qi Dongming, the director of a local shroud factory, said the funeral industry is in decline. The funeral reform and environmental protection measures have greatly impacted us. Luo, a nearby town resident, said when her mother died in the past, she spent over $14,500 on the funeral. But, she said, it was very different back then. Funeral offerings needed to have a paper house, a paper car, a pair of paper boy and girl dummies. However, at present, relevant departments are strictly controlling votive papers. We're not allowed to burn papers or light firecrackers during the Qingming Festival. Regarding the ban on the so-called feudal superstitions funeral items, Hu Ke, a lecturer at the law school of Nanchang University, believes it is an administrative measure that does not conform to folk customs and lacks a legal basis. He said the ancestor worshipping in the Qingming Festival is an important part and heritage of traditional Chinese culture. Hu said there is a problem defining the concept of a feudal superstitions funeral, and ancestor worshipping is a cultural trait passed down for thousands of years. That cultural feature includes burning votive papers, firecrackers, and incense. These offerings show Chinese people mourning, respecting ancestors, and hoping for blessings from ancestors. Therefore, they do not violate public order or common decency and cannot be considered feudal superstition. Shang Wei, an associate professor at the Central China Normal University, also believes civilized ancestor worshipping regulations should be adapted to local conditions and consider the needs of different cultures and groups. Associate Professor Xiang said the folk culture is constantly evolving, but the core of the Qingming Festival is always to remember ancestors, which should be respected. Taiwan sounds the alarm about China's military exercises. It believes that if the Chinese military continues to increase tensions, it will most likely spark an uncontrollable war that will cause countries worldwide to participate. Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu said the Chinese military exercises these past couple of days have been very serious. If you look at the stories of the Chinese Air Force, together with the ships, they're coming very close to Taiwan, and any accident may spark an uncontrollable war between Taiwan and China, and if other countries are trying to intervene, it might be the start of a war of great scale. On the second day of the exercise, the Chinese military declared it was ready to fight if Taiwan tried to declare independence from the mainland. The theater's troops are ready to fight at all times and can fight at any time to resolutely smash any form of Taiwan independence and foreign interference attempts, the military said Monday, according to the Associated Press. China's drills earlier this month are similar to those conducted in August after Taiwan received a visit from then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, D. Caliph. In it, many warships and aircraft are said to have crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait, which for decades both sides have understood as a line that military forces should not cross for fear of escalating the war. But China has ignored the line in more recent military exercises, asserting that the line is imaginary in nature. Wu warned that recent drills show that China's threat to the island is continuing to grow, arguing that it is vital for the United States to continue to support Taiwan to prevent aggression from the mainland. Wu said, if you look at the Chinese military threat against Taiwan as increasing, that diplomatic assault against Taiwan is also increasing, and therefore, for the United States, lawmakers, or the administration to show support for Taiwan, it is very critical, and this time around, we saw a tremendous show of support coming from the U.S. Congress. India is seeking to strengthen its border presence in the disputed border with China through a development drive targeting villages and infrastructure in the region. Home Minister Amit Shah launched the Vibrant Villages program during his visit to Arunachal Pradesh on April 10th. The region was the Himalayan frontier where Indian and Chinese troops last clashed in December 2022. According to Reuters, the Indian government is spending 48 billion rupees or $585 million on almost 3,000 villages in 4 states and 1 territory on the border with China. The Financial Times detailed that the fund is going into improving the infrastructure in Kibitu, a village near the border that both countries call the Line of Actual Control, which spans about 3,500 kilometers. This will involve building better roads and telecoms networks, providing clean water, generating more power, and other initiatives. The scheme was introduced shortly after China rolled out names for 11 places India believes are its territory. Arunachal Pradesh is included as part of what China sees as southern Tibet. Home Minister Shah stated, "Today we proudly say, gone are the days when anyone could encroach on our territory." The border dispute between India and China has persisted for decades, resulting in a war in 1962 and a violent confrontation in 2020. Despite agreeing on some principles of peaceful coexistence in 2005, the issue is unresolved and the situation remains precarious. Last November, CSIS reported that satellite imagery was exposing a potential Chinese military base under construction near Pangong-so, a lake at a high altitude where Indian and Chinese forces fought in 2020. Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar in March complained that the Chinese side had had trouble keeping up with its peace promises. He said,
just not tenable.